This is a historic day. For only the third time, the United States House of Representatives has voted to impeach or will be voting to impeach a president. And here to talk about that and how it is shaping up politically are our two analysts. Tom Corbett served as a governor of Pennsylvania. He is a Republican and was also the state attorney general and the U.S. attorney for Western District of Pennsylvania. On the other side of the aisle, or at least on the other side of this table, is Jim Byrne. Jim served as the chairman of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party and also as a long-term time mayor of Millvale. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us this morning. We say this is indeed a historic day, but while the House of Representatives are in the middle of debates and they're seemingly saying the same things over and over again, at the same time it appears that people are engaged over this whole process.
Absolutely, Stacy. I mean, whether you like him or dislike him, President Trump has re-energized the electorate of this nation, and especially with respect to this impeachment process. The governor and I were talking off air about the apparent redundancy of the debates and the language that we're observing as this historic day moves forward. However, you cannot take away from the fact that this nation and arguably the world are engaged on every word that is being said, every issue that is being presented, and where we go from here.
Governor, what we're seeing here are some of the rallies that took place last night, both for impeachment and those who support the president and say no, that he should not be impeached. This is becoming almost personal for people.
Oh, it is personal. Emotions are very high, but to that extent, it's segments of people. You're either pro-Trump or you're anti-Trump in this matter. What we see in the polls, and what we see, as you mentioned to me before, doesn't show a great deal of movement with all the coverage of the impeachment to this date so far. And I think that for two reasons. One, people have kind of made up their mind where they are. Okay, number two. Number two is that if you go back all the way to the Nixon impeachment, since that point in time, people have been losing confidence in government and belief and trust in government. And that's really at its height right now, I think, during this period of time.
I want to get into the polls here in just a second, Jim, but the governor brings up the Nixon impeachment. Times have changed dramatically since then. As Joe Mystic pointed out, just 4 days before the president resigned, he still had a lot of support. He wasn't going to resign until it came out that he indeed was part of a cover-up on this whole thing. Do you anticipate anything like this changing minds down the road here?
Well, I think the governor brings up another excellent point, that the minds appear to be made up. There isn't much play in the polling for people who may be on the fence yet. However, I would remind folks who are watching this process unfold that in the initial stages of the Nixon impeachment back in the early to mid-70s, as more evidence came out, as you just pointed out, the persuadables, those that were there, started to change, and people in the president's own party had to go to the White House and have a conversation with him. I don't expect that will happen this time, but there is still some room for persuasion.
Stacy, let me pick up on that point, because and he's absolutely right. But the reason that happened is that they went to court. Actually, Nixon's people went to court to block a subpoena in a judicial investigation by the special counsel, the third special counsel. And the Supreme Court made a decision on the issue of executive privilege in regard to judicial issues. In this case, neither Trump nor the Congress have gone to the court and say, give us a ruling, does he have executive privilege? And had they done that, maybe there'd be some movement on that, but they haven't.
Well, wouldn't that be up to the Congress to do it? I mean, that's the big argument that's going on right now, whether the Congress should have gone to the courts or not.
And the Democrats have to be cautious about not checking that box. The perception will be that, look, you were premeditated, you were predisposed, your plan all along was come to the conclusions that you're debating on the floor today. Conversely, Democrats could say in response to that, when we hear rhetoric from the leadership in the Republican Party that it doesn't matter what we present, what we do, what we say, we are not for this, then that would be their pushback. However, arguably, spring the trap, call the bluff,
right.
Go to court, get the decision, or conversely though, Governor, if the president wanted to, let these folks come in, present the evidence, and then argue exoneration. Well, now the Democrats say you have something to hide.
And I would think neither side really wanted to hear what the Supreme Court would say, because they were at greater risk than where they are right now.
It was a roll of the dice where you're thinking for.
And they said, we're not going to roll. This is my position. This is your position. And in their position, they were saying that you are obstructing Congress. I actually think they should have said contempt of Congress. Yes. It makes more sense to me. But neither side took this to the court to get a ruling from the independent branch of government.
the courts, the Democrats can now argue, what are you hiding? The Republicans will argue, you're just cutting corners to get to the ultimate end game.
Right.
We mentioned the polls. Let's bring some of those up. The latest polls are not trending well for those who are in favor of impeachment. As a matter of fact, here's the Real Clear Politics average of polls. First, on October the 1st, the RCP average showed that there were more in favor of impeachment and removal from the office than those who were opposed. But then you add in the latest polls that came out, and they are as of December the 17th, and you can see it started to change. Those in favor, 47.10, but now those who are opposed to removing the president have taken the majority at 48%.
Yes, the Real Clear Politics poll has moved slightly. However, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, as we were talking earlier, about the perception of redundancy. We're hearing the same things again and again and again. People who are watching, people who are engaged, are looking for something new, something different. As this moves from the House into the trial phase in the Senate, where likely we will see and have some revelations, that could change again.
I don't know that we're going to see any revelations, because it's going to be incumbent upon the Democrats to create those revelations. The Republicans aren't going to create them, and then there will be a vote. And frankly, I believe it's going to be a party line vote. The evidence hasn't been presented at any point in time that I see that would get any Republicans in the Senate to switch and make this bipartisan. That's the other aspect of the Nixon impeachment, is it was bipartisan. And that's the reason he resigned rather than be convicted, because he knew he could not survive, and the Republicans told him he could not survive.
All right, if it is bipartisan, then it obviously, you both agree, is not bipartisan now. Lines have been drawn. Democrats are on one side. Republicans are on the other side. So then, as we mentioned before, it comes to the independents. So how have they been faring recently? Well, here's the latest poll on that of the averages by Real Clear Politics, and it shows now those who are not in favor of impeaching President Trump, who declare themselves as independents, have now surged ahead of those who do believe that he should be removed. This is not necessarily good for the Democrats, is it, Jim?
No, not at this point. It isn't. It's, again, incumbent upon the Democrats to try to make a revelation or try to get those polls back in a column that's favorable to them. But conversely, when we get into the trial phase, and the Governor, you are right, what new revelations will there be? The Democrats will have an opportunity to argue, these are the charges, this is the evidence we've already shown you. And many folks may be waiting to see what the president, who keeps saying, I wait for the trial, I wait for the trial, what are you going to produce? And as two trial lawyers, you can appreciate what happens when the other side doesn't produce evidence. We can argue negative inference.
I'll use a legal term that maybe some people don't understand. This is also a motion for summary judgment at this point in time, because they have their side. The Republicans are going to say you didn't prove it, and they're going to vote that way. I don't think the trial in there will be very long. I'd be very surprised, but I think it's going to be very short. But what's interesting is you make the comment about the polls, and it's not good for the president. The polls, the president's not looking at the polls. He's looking at whether they're going to impeach him and whether they're going to convict him. And at this point, what I see politically, it's not going to happen. The polls could change completely.
Well, I was going to bring that up.
That's going to happen.
We are 11 months away, a little less now than 11 months away from the next election. How much will what is happening right now affect not only the president, but some of these other congressmen and perhaps even senators, who, depending on how the whole vote comes out?
That's a very good question.
Yes, I think we're going to need to see how this unfolds. I don't see where anybody's mind has been made up to move away from whomever they're for, a Democratic candidate or most certainly President Trump. What we've seen is they don't seem to have any indication that they will be persuaded by this, at least as we sit here today. At the end, I know we're going to get into this later, at the end of the day, I do not think that this will be significantly consequential to the outcome next November. That's going to be about candidate, that's going to be about message, that's going to be about retail, get out the vote.
I agree with that.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's end this particular segment that we're doing on our political analysis with an agreement on that. But coming back, we'll take a look at how the Democratic candidates hoping to be the next president are faring in just a moment.